All right. Thank you.
Sorry, how are
Okay, so
you?
let me re-ask the question then, since we're being
Yeah.
recorded.
Yep.
Um, you've said on LinkedIn that you don't think data teams provide a lot of value in a lot of organizations, and I know that you travel around a lot. You speak at conferences. You're talking to different people from different companies. So, what are you hearing from people about the value of data teams in organizations?
It's an interesting one. I'm sure you've seen this before. It's a combination of hope and dread, right? And part existential crisis of am I doing what I've been hired to do? Is my team doing what we think we're supposed to do? So I think this is one of the central concerns I notice with data teams. And I'll make the distinction because I don't know if I was clear in my post, but or my comment, but it was more addressed towards I would say internally facing IT. Data teams are in IT, right? So that's something you allude to in your post too, which we'll talk about in a bit. But that's more of what I was alluding to. I think that with these types of teams, because data is often because IT in general, if you take a broader look, it's seen as a cost center, right? Um, are you doing cost center type things, i.e., playing defense, or are you going to bat for certain units of the business and helping them helping use data to drive their initiatives? So I think that's kind of the where I was making the distinction. Where I see a lot of teams fail, I'll get to that point right now, is the sense of failure is really that we're just providing dashboards and reports that nobody looks at. The business doesn't seem to understand what we do. Um, and those are I think the very common complaints that I see universally around the world. It doesn't matter what size of company you're at. It doesn't matter what maturity level, but I noticed the trend where if you're a back office IT kind of internally facing a data team, this tends to be the kind of the comments that I get. What have you seen? Does this jive with your experience or um
Well, not with my personal experience, no, because I've been
yeah,
doing data work for a global Fortune 200 corporation for decades, and uh, and I've always worked very closely with the business on various initiatives, and
right.
they provide the business direction. I provide the data management support. And so I've always felt like I'm contributing a lot of value to
Right.
initiatives that are, uh, in turn, generating a lot of value for our company. But I think what one thing that you said is very true. You have to be on the front lines of where business value is being generated, where it's being created. You can't be in the back office somewhere. And part of the problem we have with data teams in our organization is, A, we don't know where to put them. We don't know where they fit in the organization. And a lot of times, as you said, data teams end up in the IT organization where they might as well be sealed in an Egyptian tomb because they're not interacting directly with the business and they're not out on the front lines where the value is being created. Another problem is that I don't think we really have a firm grasp on what it is that data teams are supposed to do. What are their areas of responsibility? What are their roles? Uh, I've been reading Tom Redmond's book, People and Data, and he talks some about this, about how the roles of the data team and how data teams are viewed by companies have evolved over the years. And
Interesting. What was the synopsis
yeah,
and like what's been the progression that you've read about so far?
well, I think when I started in data engineering, and this was like a quarter of a century ago, I think data engineering teams did more than they do now. Uh, we didn't just do database structures. We didn't just do plumbing. We didn't just do data transport. Uh, we did more things like logical data modeling, working
Right.
directly with application development teams to create databases and do database coding. A lot of times we even helped out with application coding. Uh, we did uh, uh, we did things like data quality assessments and migration of data from mainframes to uh, into data stores that were more readily available to the business. We did master data management. We did things like that. I worry a little bit that when people hear the term data engineering now, what they think of is just somebody who hooks up a hose to a data store and sprays data all over the front lawn. That we're just data plumbers, so to speak. And I worry that if people have that perception of data engineering, then they're obviously going to be thinking, where is the value in that?
Right. I mean, it's interesting, and I obviously have a vested interest in the term data engineering, but I do agree that that version of that data engineer that you described, which is just uh the data plumber, so to speak, right? Like that's I think that's what definitely a version of it. I would hate for that to be the universal perception of it because I would because I mean if you look at I mean so I think we need to distinguish too between the organizations where data is essentially the product, right? So if you look at Uber, Google, for example, I mean you can make a very strong argument that data drives these applications. They wouldn't exist without data. So if you're a data engineer, say at Google, Uber, Netflix, like you're literally on the front lines, I have a friend at Meta, for example, right? So he was in charge of machine learning and data engineering for a very, I think it was $1 or $2 billion of ad revenue. Just his team was responsible for. So like there, it's a very direct attribution to revenue. Like if this thing's down, like he said, he probably worked like 80, 90 hours a week there. Just because if something breaks, that's millions of dollars per second that's like not working, and you better fix it like right now. So like that's where I would draw, the distinction between maybe the kind of the lonely plumber or the gardener who's just like spraying data all over the lawn and wasting water. Data engineers over on the other side, these where it's more technical data first. I'd say that's a big distinction. But it's a sad state of affairs really where like terms get co-opted to kind of mean like everything in between. So you can't
Mm-hmm.
really software engineer, like I don't know what that means. It could be an application developer at Dunder Mifflin, or it could be a software engineer at Google. I don't know. I don't know. So
Yeah.
titles are, but yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah, there's there's a lot of waste.
Yeah, so that was a couple of the things that I mentioned in my LinkedIn post.
Yeah.
Where do data teams belong in the organization, and what are their roles and responsibilities? What should data teams be doing in order to provide value to an organization? Another question, I was having lunch yesterday with a colleague of mine, Laurel Sturgis, and I asked her the question. She works for a data consultancy, and I asked her the
Mm.
question, if you were putting together a data team right now from scratch, what skills or capabilities would you want to have on that data team? And that generated some very interesting conversation,
Oh,
that went all the way from, data engineering skills, especially cloud data engineering skills, business analysis skills, process management and process modeling skills. She even has a person on her team right now who's a specialist in data security and privacy. And they've used that person a lot on contracts, especially with large corporations. So, yeah,
what was the synopsis of your lunch though? Like was sorry, I forgot her name. Was your what was her name again?
Laurel,
Laurel. But
Laurel Sturgis.
did Laurel have a sense of um sort of this pain that you and I are alluding to as well with data teams, or had she seen that in her consultancy?
Yeah, probably not as much because her company gets hired by other companies, very large companies when they need data work done or they need to bring
Mm,
some data expertise in house in order to, in order to get some initiative rolling that they've already decided they're going to do and that they've already decided is going to be valuable.
Right.
So when companies are hiring you and paying you money for your expertise, the value's already there. It's taken for granted. But if you're working in a company and you're a data engineer in a company, or you're a data modeler in a company, or you're a data quality analyst in a company, it becomes a lot harder to grasp the connection between whatever it is you're doing and whatever it is that is bringing revenue into your company, that's generating business value, that's enabling your company to be successful.
Why do you think that is though?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why is it that you would need a consultant to come in? Say we take the exact same company. We have a
Mm-hmm.
data team. Value is very opaque. For some reason, I have a data engineer, data scientist, and analyst, data architect, whatever, data this, that, or whatever title. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure this data team provides value. So my null hypothesis is if I bring in, so the null hypothesis is the data team doesn't provide value. The other one is like maybe they do, but I need a consultant to identify it, or I need a consultant to bring the value to light. Like how does how are these how do you reconcile these two things? Because to me it would be like, wouldn't you want to figure out what your data team is doing and figure out the value before you bring in the consultant to provide?
Well, if you have a data team, some
Yeah,
companies just don't have in-house staff and they contract everything
right.
because they think that's more efficient. Or and sometimes company management has this idea that people from the outside are smarter and more capable than the people they have in-house. It's been the subject of many Dilbert cartoons. If you're so
Yep.
smart and capable, why are you working here?
Yep. That is Dilbert. But then,
Yeah.
I guess, because I run a data consultancy too, or I'm kind of moving on to other things right now. But I guess even when companies would hire us, we'd try and establish a clear metric of success, but sometimes it was hard. Sometimes, and this gets more into, this is where the data team probably differs because we'd be consulting with executives a lot of times. Right. And I think half the time I felt like I was more of an executive therapist than I was doing data work because they're just like, well, what should I do? How should I think about this problem? And I'm like, how do you think you should think about this problem? I don't know. I don't know your business well enough. You do. Um, but then it's a classic thing where if you bring in the data team as staff aug or in replacement of an in-house data team, the question still remains like, how do you assess the value of that, right? Like what's because I think as you were sort of alluding to this, like you think the companies think it's cheaper to hire outside than it is to bring the data team in. Anyone who's worked in consulting probably knows that that's probably not exactly true, but it's
Mhm.
it's pretty expensive. But how would you gauge? I mean, let me ask you this, Larry, just to kind of like, flip the question. But say you're the master of the universe at a company, how would you assess the value of a data team?
Hmm. I would assess the value of a data team directly by how involved they are in business processes. I mean, I'm working on a book right now, and the provisional
Oh
title
no, I
is
thought you said you weren't going to do another one.
no, I am going to do another one. The provisional title is a vision for value, and it's about increasing the business value of data teams in
Oh,
organizations.
cool.
And so I'm doing a lot of research, going through a lot of studies, and so on. But one thing that really jumps out on me is that we have to uh, data teams are effective only to the extent that they are directly involved in value creating business processes. And something this goes back to something that our friend uh, Malcolm Hawker talked about on LinkedIn too, about how a lot of data literature, like the Dama Dimbach, for example, doesn't really seem to have a lot of applicability to what's happening in businesses today because so much of data literature is centered around data at rest. So talk about
Yeah.
data modeling, data quality, data governance, metadata management, all of this stuff. It's all data at rest. It's data sitting in a data store somewhere, being carefully tended by data professionals like a garden that nobody ever actually eats from. And the thing that has to be understood is that data is valuable only when it's in motion. Data doesn't have value when it's at rest. It has value when it's in motion, supporting information processes, streams of information that connect business stakeholders in ways that support business processes that generate value. So the data has to be in motion, which means that we data professionals need to get our heads wrapped around business process management, business process reengineering. We have to be comfortable with process work as well as data work.
Yeah. He was talking about this, and I think he also took a dig at domains, right? Like we don't model domains, we model business processes. And so I think that there's
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think there's a separate article. But I do agree with that. It's something I've been actually writing about right now. This section of the book I'm writing is actually the delineation of basically modeling software applications versus data modeling, right? These are not the
Mm-hmm.
same things at all, actually. And um,
Right.
but then tying that back to the subsequent section was about the differences of business processes, subject areas, and domains. Like these aren't necessarily the same things. Some capture specific context, other capture without behavioral constructs, other capture so it's sort of like you start generically as subject areas and you go all the way down. But the business processes are one of those things where it's like mapping that to data is actually really tricky because these aren't a one-to-one mapping. There's behavioral aspects that you can't capture in data precisely because, as he points out, data is at rest. It's a static thing, right? So you strip away the
Right.
behavioral elements of that. And so that's one of the things I've been threading through right now. So yeah, I agree. And it does tie back to the process where like, in the real world, ignoring all the pedantic, nerdy stuff that we just talked about with modeling and process, but it's like you're absolutely right, and he's right too. Where if you're not connected to a process that drives value, um, like what are you doing? I don't know, to be
Right,
blunt,
exactly.
right?
And one of the things that I learned from my friend Laurel is process modeling. She very, very early on pioneered the use of things like data flow diagrams to
Nice.
capture the interrelationship between data and processes. And I think that's very important. In
It's
my last book, Data Model Storytelling, there's a whole chapter on how you can use data models and DFDs, data flow diagrams, to support business process reengineering efforts. And that's where you start getting into where data people can actually start providing tangible value to
yeah.
organizations.
But this isn't taught, right? Like this isn't taught to, I would say, if you look at the curriculum that data professionals go through, say you get a master's of information systems or a master's of business analytics, which is kind of the path that a lot of people get into, or computer science or whatever. It's like data flow diagrams, right? Thinking about business
Mm-hmm.
processes and translating it into uh, data, however you want to think about it, like that's not taught, right?
No, no, almost never. Like I say, everything that's taught and a lot of what's written is all about static data and static data structures. And that I think is goes a long way towards answering the question, why aren't data people valued in organizations?
mm,
But one
Interesting.
thing that we've done in our organization to try and counteract that is that we started an initiative called Digital Strategy, and we put together a working group of people from the business, people from the data side, people from application development, uh, to put together a strategy, a plan for how to use uh, the latest and best data technology and the latest and best application development and services delivery technology to uh, to support initiatives that would create new products for our company, add intelligence to existing products, um, provide more services to our customers, increase brand recognition and customer loyalty, identify new markets, expand existing markets. And so we have specific business outcomes that we want to achieve. And then we once we identified those initiatives, we asked the question, what kind of uh, data support or analytics support or information support or application support or services support do we need in order to make these things happen? And how do we go from our current as is data architecture and application delivery architecture to a a data and applications architecture and process that actually more directly supports these business initiatives?
It's really interesting. Kind of backing up, why did you decide to write a book on this topic?
Oh, that's a good question. I think part of it has to do with the fact that I had to leave the company I was working at because my wife is very, very sick, and I had to take like early retirement so I could stay home.
Oh, sorry to hear
And
that.
yeah, so I'm basically the at-home caregiver for my wife right now. But what and when I told my company, okay, I've got to leave, um, we need to get a person or maybe some people hired that I can train to take over for me when I leave so that, you don't lose all of this knowledge that I have and all of these skills and capabilities. Well, my company chose not to do that. They didn't replace me when I
Oh,
left,
interesting.
and they didn't let me train anybody. And so then the question in my mind is, okay, how much, I knew from working on all these business initiatives and projects and everything over the last 20, 25 years, I knew how much value I was creating in our organization. I knew how valuable I was. But since they opted not to replace me when I left, the question obviously comes up. Did they not understand how valuable I was? And then I was reading a report from MIT Sloan about CDOs and CDO organizations, and some of those findings were pretty appalling. The
Mm.
average tenure of a chief data officer, 2.5 years,
Hmm.
which is half that of CEOs, CFOs, COOs. Only half of CDOs are able to drive innovation using data. Only 40% of CDOs manage data as a business asset. And roughly 26% of CDOs have succeeded in creating a data driven organization. And only 40% of respondents said the CDO role is successful and established within their organization. And there have actually been stories out on LinkedIn, that I've seen where companies have fired their CDOs and laid off their entire data organization
Yep.
because those people were not seen as really driving business value.
This is the heart of what I was talking about. So it was interesting. Uh, one of my really good friends is Sol Rashidi, who is very decorated
Mm-hmm.
CDO and CAO and so forth. But she'll never go back to enterprise, I don't think, and take the CDO role. I can't see her doing that ever again. I'm not speaking for her. Maybe she'll get a wild hair and decided to go back and do it again. But I mean, and I was at a CDO conference with her last year, and it was interesting. She was talking some of the, CDOs of some of the biggest companies in the planet. And I felt like I was at a therapy session or an AA meeting because I was these people were just on a panel lamenting and talking, kind of behind the scenes. I'm not going to name names, obviously, but it was like the general consensus I got was it's hard to achieve alignment with the business. You have a lot of other stakeholders who control data, and now you're brought in
Mhm.
as the data overlord, perhaps, and nobody in their right mind is going to give up their data without a good reason, even with an executive mandate from the CEO. And so they just talk constantly about, how they spend most of their time in alignment meetings, right? And once you start, you have about a 6 month window before that you need to start showing value. Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, it just sounds like it's just one thing after another. I've heard stories, friends joining companies and they inherit a data team that's been there for decades, and come to find out this, one situation, this data team was simply a copy paste operation, like doing MDM, but it was literally an operation where these people had kind of work for life, and they were just copy pasting stuff all day. Is that efficient ways to do stuff? Probably not, right? But that's just the workflows. Sometimes you inherit these teams because you're sold one thing when you do the interview process, and you come in as a CDO, and you're like, what the heck did I just inherit?
Mhm.
Then you have these leaders who have been there for a long time, like chief information officers, and so forth, who you have control over the data. Now you're seen as a threat to that, perhaps. I mean, this happens a lot. This is what I heard, at least. And so you couple this together with the short tenure you mentioned, right? So if I'm a CIO
Mhm.
and I see a CDO come in, I'm just like, I just need to wait you out,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I just need to let you spin your wheels, get frustrated, and either you're gonna get fired or you're gonna find something else to do. And I'll still be here. So,
Yeah, and a lot of data teams get stuck in some part of the organization where they can't really be effective, or they're under management that won't let them be effective, or they're hampered by processes and ways of doing things and rules and regulations that restrict them and keep them from being successful.
oh yeah.
And a lot of times, the only way for a data team to be successful is to break completely out of
Yep.
all of those straitjackets.
Yep.
I'll tell you a story. Here's a data team success story.
Yeah, let's talk about positive stuff. We talk
Yeah,
enough time talking about the graveyards.
yeah. So I'm reading a really good book. I don't know if I can hold this up. It's called "Data Is Everybody's Business,"
Nice.
and it's by Barbara Wixom, Cynthia Beath, and Leslie Owens.
Cool.
And there's some really nice data success stories in this book. And one of the stories they tell is about BBVA. It's a big international financial services institution with a lot of branches and offices in Latin America and Europe. And as a big bank, they have a very rigid organizational structure, a lot of rules, a lot of regulations, a lot of processes that really keep innovation from happening. So, but they started thinking we probably have some data in our organization that could be monetized. We should look into seeing if any of our data can be monetized and sold, marketed. So they created a data team, a data and analytics team, and they gave them access to 5 million customer banking records and said, see what you can do with this. Well, they discovered there really wasn't much they could do with it inside that rigid organization. So they took the data team and the data, they went to MIT and they partnered with a team at MIT that was very conversant with cloud technologies, which were very new at the time. And they cleaned up all of this data. They modeled it. They made sure they understood what all the fields were and what they meant in business terms. And they cleaned up the data. They anonymized it all so that you couldn't identify any individual banking customer. And they analyzed it and aggregated it, using machine learning technology, and uh, they started reaching out to different stakeholders, government regulators, private philanthropies, small business startups, a lot of business people to try and find out where the markets were for this data and what those markets needed the data to look like and what form they needed the data to be in. And they made sure that all of the legal hurdles and the privacy regulations were all were all squared away, so that everything was done the right way. And then once they had all their ducks in a row, they had the data they needed. It was all properly aggregated. They had the relationships with all of these business and regulatory stakeholders solid. They had the markets identified. They knew who was going to buy this data and for how much. Then they started their own business subsidiary.
That's
So they
cool.
started BBVA Data and Analytics, DNA, and they located the business across the Atlantic Ocean from the parent company in Madrid. They had a completely different organizational structure, was very flattened, uh, very few layers of management. They created an environment that fostered collaboration and communication. They had they instituted a very agile process so that they could deliver uh, data products and deliver business value very quickly and iteratively. And they started marketing this data, and they were very successful. And then they went back to the parent company and explained everything they'd done and how they did it and what the
Interesting.
value was being generated from it. And the bank said, "That's great. Keep doing this. Here's some more data you can have access to." And the DNA people created more data products. They used data to determine how some of the bank's existing customer facing products like web apps and phone apps could be improved. They improved a lot of the home bank's business processes using data. And they just kept doing this iteratively and iteratively, either creating data products to monetize or figuring out how to improve banking processes or figuring out how to improve customer facing products. And the thing that really hit me between the eyes when I was reading this story in the book is that here is a data team that is functioning as a business unit,
Yep.
as a business organization, and they are using data and analytics to create value because they are not functioning as a data team, they are functioning as a business.
Bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And that's just and yeah, that's beautiful. And to me, this is how it should be done. Like if you can remove the word data from what you're doing and you're just like, we're using data to do something, but we're not worshiping at the altar of data. To me, that's how you create the value that you're talking about, right? Because
Right. You said
back to
that
the
on
comment,
LinkedIn that the data was most valuable when you didn't think about it as data.
that's just it. I mean, you don't go around, saying, we're oxygen driven or air driven. You sort of just take it for granted because that's how it is, right? Same with water, right? It's like, or the thing that comes to mind is the internet, right? We used to say everything was internet powered, and now it's you just take it for granted. We're talking over it right now. I think the same is going to happen with AI. But the thing with data is, for some reason, like you don't have, um, like an internet team at your company, right? It just sort of
Right.
does things. Like it's just there for some reason. And I don't know if it's the industry's fault, like because I think that data teams have always existed in some way, shape, or form. When I got into data, it was more like the CEO of this company just had me sit outside his office and just help him work through business problems. And he'd have me embedded with different business units, sales, marketing, operations, whatever. So I got a very good view of the business.
Mhm.
Basically got an MBA on this, through my experience there. And that was a lot of fun, but I don't think once were we like, I think he may have called me like the data nerd or something, but yeah, but the thing is like you're embedded in business units solving problems. So it wasn't like um, and the reason he did that is because the reason he wanted me tasked with it is all these different teams had kind of their own thing going on, because they weren't getting data needs satisfied, so they would hire their own analysts, and that analyst would do something, but then the numbers would never match between these different silos, as you can imagine, is what happens when
Mhm.
you're dealing with different data and don't have standards. So like I was brought in to just to do that, but at the same time being embedded. Um, but it was seen as a revenue driving operation. Like he was like, if you're not helping me drive the business, then you can step up or you can step out. I think he said it to me once when I first started.
Mhm.
So I thought I'd be passive, and it's like, don't you're helping me run the business. And I thought that was cool,
Right.
right? But that's
Hmm.
rare. That's really rare. But I saw it in action, first job, like I said, where it was like you're driving the business. We doubled revenue every year, and that's great. But you see, when I go around the world and I see data teams, like the ones I see that are always again having the trouble is when it's data, 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 and this is somehow disconnected from the realities of the business. Like what you described, like it took that team to go outside the business and basically spin up a unit that did awesome. And the
Hmm.
business is like, here's more money, here's more data, have a nice day, bring back more money to us,
Yeah. And that was able to do things that couldn't be done from inside the regular
right?
business because of management restrictions and process
I was going to
restrictions.
ask when you said like why they didn't feel they could do what they take the data and be effective in the organization. Like, what was the reason behind that?
Well, for one example, there was a rule at the bank that you couldn't use any cloud technologies. Cloud technologies were verboten. So they went to MIT, where people had access to cloud technologies and understood cloud technologies and could teach them how to effectively leverage those cloud technologies. And the new DNA spinoff was able to use agile processes and do things iteratively instead of, these long months and year long waterfall based processes that the bank was using. And they
Yeah.
were able to kind of embed people from different disciplines together, the data people and the business people and the legal people and the communications people, put them all together in a group. So very much like human-centered design, where you
Mm,
figure out the capabilities you need and you bring in people from all these different areas. That might be software engineering and it might be anthropology or it might be storytelling or whatever. There's a great story about how Microsoft was trying to improve the performance of its financial analysts so that they would spend less time crunching numbers and more time actually working with people in the field, sales managers and reps, to do things that would actually make money for the company. And part of it involved creating better financial analysis tools that would get them the numbers they needed faster. But they also sent all of these people to workshops to teach them communication and collaboration skills and
mm.
storytelling skills so that the time that they spent working with people in the field, with customers, would be more productive. And it increased the productivity of financial analysts at Microsoft by some 30%.
That's a good
So you need a
investment.
lot of different capabilities, and it's not just technical skills,
Right.
but it's business analysis skills, it's communication skills, it's collaboration skills. There's a lot of different skills that you need in order to be successful in business, and they're not all data skills, and they're not all technical skills.
That's certainly true. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the uh data professionals out there who are technically awesome, but probably couldn't communicate to their own shoes if they wanted to.
Hmm.
It's the old joke, right? Like, how do you know introverted actuary from an extroverted one? The introverted one stares at his shoes. The extroverted one stares at yours. And it's just like, but the
Yeah.
But the communication
Yeah, I mean,
part's
and I was
huge.
very much that sort of a person when I first started out working in organizations and doing data work. I was very much an introverted data nerd who had trouble communicating. And I actually solved my problem by joining Toastmasters, the
Right.
international public speaking organization. I spent 10 years in Toastmasters, and it was enormously beneficial to me. I couldn't be doing this podcast right now if it wasn't for the skills that I
Oh,
learned at
interesting.
Toastmasters. I couldn't speak at conferences. I couldn't do data modeling sessions with business people. I couldn't do collaboration with software engineers. Uh, when I started in Toastmasters, the first thing they have you do is like a 3-minute speech where you just introduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself and your interests. It's called an icebreaker. I read my icebreaker speech from a typed page.
Interesting.
That's how bad I was.
But you got to start somewhere,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
But but now I have a lot more confidence and ability to talk to people and communicate more effectively, tell stories, collaborate, work with people to solve problems, to work on business initiatives and that sort of thing. And those are the skills you have to have.
Oh yeah. It's the art of listening too, right? It's as much
Mm-hmm.
talking as it is being actively listening and knowing what to listen for. That's one thing in my new data engineering course on Coursera. Like we have, I think the first 2 weeks, it's not about data engineering actually at all. It's about communicating with stakeholders, listening to people. And so the exercises are here's what somebody said. Uh, you need to go and pick out like what's actually important and what they're looking for. This is a hugely
Mm-hmm.
underrated skill, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is like, I'm not going to put you in front of, I'm not going to teach you data engineering without you having the skills to know what it is you're supposed to be engineering in the first place. If you don't have that skill, you simply know a bunch of tools, and that doesn't really help you if you don't know what
Yeah.
you're doing with them. But it's about
Mm-hmm.
listening and being able to communicate effectively. So a lot of the exercises are going back and forth, role playing with different types of stakeholders. Souls on the class, you talk to a chief data officer. Not that most organizations maybe you do, maybe you don't. But the other ones are like you're talking to a colleague and understanding what they want. But as you point out, those are the skills that aren't taught. Again, it's like you mentioned flow diagrams and then other stuff. And it's like none of this stuff is taught for some reason, right? We always fixate on here's statistics, learn stats. Here's different ways of visualizing reports. Here's schema design, right? But I think what
Mm-hmm.
you're alluding to in the central element, I'd love you to write about this in your book. Hopefully you do, but it's all these other parts that we're talking about. I would actually argue the technical part is table stakes. Like that you should know this stuff. If you don't, like, go learn it. But the other stuff you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
that's important. That's what's going to help you with the business and probably avoid being a cost center. That's my thought.
Right, exactly. So one of the things that I'm doing for the book is, and I sent you a PowerPoint with some of these diagrams on that I'm working on. But one of them is the Dama Dimbach wheel, that has data governance at the center, and then it has these 10 data related capabilities around it. So, data governance is supposed to be the core competency, and then they have all of these other things like data modeling and database development and data warehousing and metadata management and MDM that support the core competency of data governance. But again, all of that stuff is data at rest, it's static data. So I started thinking about how organizations create business value, and I came up with a different wheel of what organizations have to do in order to be successful. And I identified 10 core competencies, things like organizational skills, innovation, leadership and strategy, process engineering, communication and training, risk and change management, stakeholder management, culture and behavior, product management, legal and regulatory, those kind of things
That's cool.
that these are these are competencies that all organizations have to have in order to succeed at whatever it is they're doing. And at the center of this framework, just like with the Dimbach wheel, I have knowledge management, because you have to know how to do all of these different things. You have to know how to do product management. You have to know how to do stakeholder management. You have to know how to build an effective organization or an effective culture. So knowledge management to me is the core competency for creating business value. And what we do in the data realm is only valuable insofar as it increases the ability of organizations to know what to do and how to do it effectively.
That's really interesting. So do you see this knowledge management sitting alongside data management? And where do you
Well,
see how do you see this working?
okay, the way I see it working is that data is used to create information streams, flows
Yeah,
of information, what used to be called the virtual value stream, uh, where you're using data to connect stakeholders in an organization or an enterprise together so that they can collaborate and solve problems and identify opportunities and manage risks and do all the other things that organizations need to do. Uh, as organizations use those information streams to do things, to create opportunities and manage risks and all of that, they acquire knowledge. They learn what works and what doesn't work, what is successful, what isn't successful. And this is what's called tacit knowledge. It's the knowledge that comes from experience, from doing things and seeing what works and what doesn't. So data management is important only insofar as that data is used to create information streams, virtual value streams that bring people together to solve problems and create value. And and insofar as that information is then used to increase an organization's store of knowledge and expertise that it can then leverage to do more things that create value.
I like this a lot.
One example that I use a lot in my writings is a company called American Hospital Supply, AHS. They used to have very traditional business model. They would buy medical and hospital supplies, they would store them in a warehouse, they would take orders from doctors' offices and hospitals, and they would take the stuff out of the warehouse and ship it to the customers. But they realized that business model wasn't sustainable in the age of the internet, the age of Amazon, where people can order stuff online. So they used data to completely change their business model. They created an online portal that allows their customers to order products directly from their suppliers, cutting out the middleman, which in this case is AHS.
Right.
And it seems crazy, but it works because the customers pay a monthly subscription to use the portal. The customers are happy because they can get their orders, get their stuff delivered faster, and they have more choices, more selection. The suppliers are happy because they get more orders and more customers. AHS gets the revenue from the portal plus a percentage of each transaction. Plus, they save the expense of having to manage a warehouse and a fleet of trucks. So, this is a case where they use data to create flows of information that completely change the way they do business. They
Hmm.
completely change their business model using data and information.
That's awesome. And
That's the stuff we need to be doing.
yep, yeah, I agree. Especially in this day and age, right? Where data is powering a lot more than just dashboards and reports, right? I mean, it's powering,
Hmm.
like you can make an argument that AHS is basically a data powered business at this point.
Right.
Because if you
And it,
because I would say the supposition is if I cut out data, say I turn off the spigot of data to AHS, what happens? You don't have a business. You don't have like I just shut off your central nervous system. You can't move. You're dead. So and
mhm.
that's the power of it, right? Whereas if I turn off your dashboards in your, the back office IT dashboards, does your business stop? Probably not.
Mhm.
I could make it, I mean, and I used to do this. I used to turn off reports all the time. Who would cry? Actually, turns out not that many people because not that many people look at reports. And so that's,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, AHS went from being a brick and mortar business to a
yeah.
virtual business
hmm Yeah,
using
and
data
brick and
and
mortar,
information.
when you're using data is basically for replenishment flows to your warehouse. You're looking at orders going out, but you're basically it's a supply and demand balance at that point. Is essentially how you run those kind of businesses. Whereas now it's like that's your broker. It's
Hmm.
way different.
Yeah.
Not to say data is not important when you're running a brick and mortar operation. I mean, it certainly is, but it's like the data you're using for that is, at least it's you get the orders in, you make sales, right? Inventory orders and so forth. It's interesting. That's also a really ballsy move, to be frank. Like I don't know
Hmm.
a lot of companies that would just say, "Yeah, we're going to scrap our old business model and do this other one." So,
Right. But that's the sort of thing you have to be able to do if you're going to really leverage data and information to create value. Because a
yep.
lot of times what we do is we use data and information to streamline or automate things that we shouldn't be doing in the first place.
hmm
Streamlining very inefficient processes or automating
What would be an
very
example of
inefficient
that?
processes. Oh, God, that's a good question. Um, That is a good question. I'll have to find some examples of that, but I know that a lot of companies just do that. They say, here's what we do. How can we do what we do more efficiently instead of asking the question, is this really what we should be doing? Should we be doing something different?
hmm
And one of the things that I said in my last book, Data Model Storytelling, is that one of the responsibilities of a data modeler is to ask the big why and the big why not. Why are
Yeah.
we doing this? Should we be doing something different?
Yeah.
Should we be reimagining this process that we're working on right now?
hmm Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, and you see this in data teams too. I think there's a lot of data ceremony that goes on, and a lot of data theater. And I'll give you an example. Back to an internal facing team, right, where you're creating reports, dashboards. Um, Now you're setting up orchestration workflows, right? So investing a lot into the technical pipelines. But the central question is what the data team is delivering to the end users even being used in the first place, right? Or are we just
Mm-hmm.
optimizing you know, for nothing, really? I mean, because if nobody's using the reports and taking action off of it or making decisions, then it probably doesn't matter, I would argue. It's like it's you're wasting your time. Nobody cares.
Yeah, and maybe
So,
those unused and unneeded dashboards are an example of where we've automated some part of a business process that isn't producing value for anybody.
hmm Well, in those processes, somebody asked for a report probably at one point. It's not like reports just sort of pop up out of thin air. Sometimes they do,
Hmm.
I guess, but like for the most part, somebody probably had an itch. And they're like, "Hey, I need you to give me some information about this. I need it by tomorrow, by the way." Classic thing that happens, right? And then what do you think happens tomorrow? Report lands in this person's inbox, goes unopened, or they might look at it once, don't look at
Hmm.
it again, because a lot of these quote processes you talk about, a lot of these are gut driven. Um, uh,
Hmm.
Business processes anyway, right? Where there's the only thing you're optimizing is towards somebody's bias, maybe not towards a more efficient process. And so that's the other unspoken thing in business too, is a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but there are definitely processes and things that happen in business that are the result of um, sort of what I would call hippo-driven or ego-driven type things. Hippo-driven means like the highest paid person opinion. And so
Mm.
that tends to be, how sadly how a lot of decisions are made, and even in quote data-driven companies. I mean, I see this. There's classic examples. There's companies in your neck of the woods, in Washington,
Hmm.
that I would say are supposedly very data-driven, but I hear behind the scenes that a lot of it, especially when we're talking at the exec level, is very much gut driven and opinion driven, and that's how it is.
Yeah. And I would
So,
say that unless you are willing to change the way you do things, unless you're willing to radically change your processes, you cannot claim to be data driven because a lot of times the data is going to tell you that you need to change the way you're doing things.
mhm.
And if you're not willing to do that, then you can't be data driven.
So in this book, then, when you're talking about data teams that drive value, what are, and I know you're still writing the book. I know how it is. I'm not going to ask you for like, what's the Larry Burns prescription for the book, but what's your prescription for today while you're writing the book on if you're a data team that's stuck in a rut, say where the data teams we've been talking about, maybe you work at whatever business Dilbert's at. I can't remember the name.
Hmm.
Say that you're Dilbert and Dilbert's on a data team. How do you get out of that hellhole, to put it politely?
Well, one piece of advice that I've given to data professionals before is to try to establish connections with people outside the data team and outside of IT. Get to know people in the business and ask them, where their pain points are and what they need. Talk to the application development people and see where their pain points are. Try to try to either join up with or start an initiative like digital strategy and get some people together to talk about how to use uh, data technology and software technology to find business opportunities and reduce risk and expand markets and do actual tangible business things. Uh, talk to managers,
Right.
talk to people in management, find out what their pain points are, but try and get outside of the data team, try to get outside of the IT organization and establish relationships with people outside of IT and get them, get to know them, make sure they get to know you, uh, make sure they understand that you are somebody who could help them and is willing to help them, even if it means going outside the bounds of your current job description or what's currently expected of you. Even if it means breaking a few rules or bending a few rules.
Yeah.
But try and get yourself out as close to the business and as close to the front lines of value creation as you possibly can.
Amen to that. When does your book come out?
Oh, I have no idea. I've barely started on it, so it's
Okay.
probably going to be at least a year.
Yeah, at least a year. Are you working through a publisher on it?
Yeah, it'll come out through Techniques Publications.
Nice.
They've published all of my books, and Steve has said that he will publish this one when I get it done.
Awesome. Yeah, he's awesome. So that's cool. Well, I'll once you get closer to it, when we would do a recap on the book and can help you plug it and whatnot. If you need a reviewer, happy to review it too. While you're writing it. So, but it sounds
Oh,
awesome.
yeah, I will certainly keep you in mind for that. I might even ask you to write a foreword for it.
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I like the idea of it. It's like what you just said at the end, right there was like perfect, right? I mean, that's something I can resonate with, right? Just we need to get in front of the and work alongside the business, not just be stuck in the the like an office space. Milton, the guy with the red stapler, I think he just keeps progressively moving to a worse and worse location in the office where he's in the basement. Uh, the
Mm.
final one before he decides to burn the entire building down. But anyways, so well, Larry, it's always fun talking to you. It's
Yeah, this is
so
great. I always enjoy our conversations.
yeah, exactly. So cool. And for people who want to learn more about you or find you, how can they do that?
Well, they can connect with me on LinkedIn. for one thing. I have a slew of articles on tdan.com that they're all free to look at. There's no paywall or anything. And then I have my three books: Building the Agile Database, Growing Business Intelligence, and Data Model Storytelling.
Great books. Data model storytelling is somewhere on my bookshelf. And the TDAN article is actually really, really good. I think your Agile series, sort of the life and death of Agile, I think it was kind of summing it
Mm.
up, maybe wrongly, but it was great. Like a really when you publish the next ones, I was like I dropped whatever I did. I always read my articles on my spin bike, so I can like multitask. But I was like, this is great, great stuff. So keep it up.
Yeah, I've got a four-part series on there about the economics of data and information. That will be a section in the upcoming book. I've got a series on data modeling for domain-driven development and microservices and service architecture. There's a lot of good stuff out there. So
Hmm.
yeah, definitely check
I'm
it
actually
out.
referencing those right now in the part I'm writing on domains. So it's yeah, it's yeah, it's a treasure trove of stuff. So thanks for everything you do. I think it's you're doing the Lord's work.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm
Especially because
trying to
it's
contribute as
hard.
much as I can to the profession.
It's awesome. Well, thanks, Larry. We'll talk to you
Thanks,
soon.
Joe.
All right,
Nice
thank
to
you.
talk to you. You take
Likewise.
care.
Bye bye.